Okay, can you hear me now? Let me know if I'm like peaking or way too loud. Okay, good. I guess when I updated OBS, it kind of like broke my mic settings. Oh man, I was talking that whole time. I was like welcoming you guys and like, it's all good. At least it's chance to kind of fill in some more air. But no, for Kit Kat, I did answer your question. if you're talking about like the author's voice in the story, I think that's something that kind of like, even if you're not using your own voice for the story, it does show up in your style. And in a way, I feel like your voice kind of bleeds through to like your characters, unless you're like really, really good at like kind of being meta about it in a way, kind of like method acting. And then other than that whole time I was pretty much just rambling about like my work process, how right now I'm doing kind of words on page as opposed to focusing about format and voice and grammar. I'm just trying to get the story out so that I can kind of have like a better idea of how I want to draft it. It's kind of like a rough draft in a way, but for me it's more of like a pre-draft, and then my rough draft is really my first draft. But for the most part, I can kind of like go over it a little bit if you guys are interested of like what I'm setting up now and where I want to go with the story, because I do like build like a roadmap of my ideas, and I use those kind of as like mile markers or checkpoints of story beats I want to hit. Yeah, it's really getting difficult to kind of witch hunt for AI in writing, just because since it does copy from like actual writing, there are certain things that it does that will make sense and will kind of work. But since AI writing is mostly trained off of like professionally published and public domain based stuff, and now it's more recently stealing a bunch of stuff, it has a lot of characteristics that your general writer won't use, either because it's an older style of writing or it's just like a more advanced level of writing. So like the whole M dashes thing being a sign of AI, they're not really a sign of AI because it's a very common thing, especially in like fiction writing, and especially since like the M dash is a very useful grammar, because it's, in a lot of ways, if you don't know what punctuation to use, if you use an M dash, it's going to be right about 90% of the time. It's a very good catch-all for punctuation, so a lot of advanced writers will use it, especially so that they don't have a lot of the same punctuation going on with exclamation points, commas, and whatnot. That is the big problem with it, though, is that even though it can copy the style and the techniques, it does not know the context, and so it doesn't know why one thing is in one spot as opposed to another spot. Oh yeah, if you don't know how to do it like on a laptop or on your computer, instead of like custom looking up the M dash, you can always do the Alt key plus the numbers 0151, and it will pull up an M dash. And the difference between it and the normal dash is that it's just like a little bit longer. Yeah, I think that's part of the habit with like coding, is that because of certain kind of protecting the creator of the AI or the person who's like running the AI, it plays too much to the neutral or tries to err on the side of like being more permissive with a lot of things. Like there are certain things that it'll hardline you about, like it's not going to figure out a way to win the lottery, it's not going to figure out tell you how to do things that are like illegal, and also there are certain things where it can be like sued over. Like if it said that it gave you the right stock to pick and you ended up losing a bunch of money, then they could get sued for like the false information, even though most of what AI makes up is just fabricated. But I don't know, it's just, I really don't see it being viable for actual use. And the problem is that we're in a direction where companies wanted to replace people to save like the executives money so that they can have more in their pocket. I'm thinking that I am gonna go with Kiwiverse. I do like the way that that sounds. I might change it up a little bit, because for the most part, all the stories that I'm gonna write, I do plan on doing under Kiwi the Goblin or Kiwi Goblin. If I do write anything that's like explicitly smut, or like I do any ghostwriting or anything, then that's definitely not gonna be under my name. Like, I can understand like AI for personal use, but if you're doing anything in the public with it, it's just not to that level. Because for the most part, like, AI is just mashing stuff together and seeing what like gets it the points. You know, I could just call it the Goblin Verse. That way I can kind of like make fun of J.K. Rowling and like those older style goblins that were just like allegories. Because for the like a little bit of world building, because I guess this short story is the original world that Kiwi is born into, and then eventually, like, because of gaining cosmic abilities, Kiwi will get like the ability to create universes and traverse to other universes. I'm thinking that for the goblins in this world, I did read it off earlier, like how I plan on opening the short story back when I was muted, because I'm a big old fool. But I can go ahead and read it again. Excuse me for like my terrible voice for reading. There's a reason that I'm behind the screen as the writer and not a narrator or voice actor. And eventually I will get Elaine to read this so that she can perform it and make it so much better. But goblins are born like other creatures. Instead of the usual way, or sorry, goblins aren't born like other creatures. Instead of the usual way, we're born from people's desires, growing beyond the point of obsession. That same drive that gives us life also brands us, forcing us to become totems of your vice, creatures for you to slay in the name of cleansing the world from an evil of your own making. I kind of wanted like goblins to be a reflection on the world that they exist in, so they, instead of just being born out of like negative desires people have, it's more that they're born out of obsessive desires that people have. Yeah, it kind of does like play on the trope of like older fairy tales and more like Brothers Grimm type stuff, but I do want there to be like a layer of hope with it too, because you're the same that you're gonna have goblins who are obsessed with like greed and money, or goblins who just do terrible awful things and that's all they can think of. There's also going to be those goblins who are born from like paladins who are very religious and want to do good for the world. And then you have like Kiwi, where Kiwi was born from like an author who like that's all they wanted to do was write and create worlds and share their stories. But I don't really have a backstory for that author. I don't know if I have it so that like their last dying wish was what birthed Kiwi, or if maybe eventually in the future Kiwi may meet the author that created them. But I think I do like the idea of like this origin story kind of being like Kiwi is born and survives and grows and gains experiences until they run into the corpse of the celestial Kiwi, where they like eat some of the Kiwi and that flesh kind of turns them into this like pseudo celestial being, and then like harvest some of the feathers and skins from Kiwi, or from the celestial Kiwi, and uses as clothes. That's kind of like the most OP like armor in a way, but it's more of, instead of being about protection, it is more about like kind of like a cloak that allows them to pass through like to different universes. Yeah, in a way, like primordial Kiwi soup is exactly what it is. I like stories where creatures are beings are born from human emotions or thoughts. Yeah, it's not a trope that like I see as often as I would like, because the whole idea of like our thoughts being able to influence the world. One of the other short stories I have planned is kind of a gods are created from belief type story. I haven't really worked out much of the details for that one, but it's one of over 150 ideas in my list, and I counted the other day since I'm trying to organize all my notes. Ooh, I actually like that Valkyrie idea, because like it's not limiting like what beings died in battle, and then you can give those kind of like reincarnated characteristics to the different Valkyries. That'd be a fun little idea. But yeah, for the most part, what I'm doing right now, besides trying to remember where I was and where I want to go next, like with my roadmap, I do have like Kiwi kind of popping into existence, because the idea is that goblins are born fully formed based off of the desires that created them, and then having Kiwi kind of land in a pond, very toddler style, excitedly looking at the world and taking everything in, and not knowing like what's safe, what's dangerous, kind of a little bit of like cautiously optimistic about everything around there. Yeah, baby's first gaze, that exactly right. And from there, I'm gonna have a crocodile bear type creature that emerges from the water and chases Kiwi, and I want it to be like kind of an intense moment, where it's like the first experience of fear that Kiwi had. And then after Kiwi ends up like barely escaping, running off into the woods, kind of exploring, scavenging, collecting what could be useful, and then running into some other goblins, and then kind of following on, and from those 3 goblins that Kiwi runs into, that I'm gonna kind of build like what would be like the stereotypes for the golems, where it's like they'll each be their own individuals, but they have certain characteristics that like most goblins have that Kiwi just doesn't, because that drive to be a writer, to create stories, is so strong that that's pretty much like the only aspect of Kiwi's personality at this point so far. And so Kiwi would just kind of observe until they end up finding like something that's shiny enough or special enough that they kill each other over it, and then Kiwi's just gonna loot their bodies and move on to the next part, where I described it a little bit as like kind of like a peak mechanic, where Kiwi has to worry about how much they're carrying, how much food they have, and starts traversing kind of rough terrain before falling into the ravine where the corpse of the giant celestial Kiwi is. and that's where like Kiwi will kind of gain their abilities and powers after eating, and then I don't know how I want to transition it from there. I'm thinking that maybe there will be like some sort of just like blink teleport that will send Kiwi off to either a random world or a random part of the world, and Kiwi will experience people and kind of like watch and observe people from a distance, because like everybody thinks goblins are evils, though they don't even pay attention to like what desires the goblin has. And I think after Kiwi like learns about people enough, I'll have them run into a storyteller who like kind of goes to towns and will just tell stories to all the villagers and the kids and everything like that. And that's where Kiwi will realize like that is their desire, that is what they want to do. And so I'll probably have Kiwi follow that storyteller or even approach that storyteller and go from there. And then I'm gonna find a way to kind of introduce Kiwi learning about their powers, and then like being able to explore worlds to end off the short story. It probably end it with a scene of like Kiwi putting pen to paper and writing down this origin story. Yeah, I do like the idea of like Kiwi being able to write more through experiencing more, because that's kind of how it is for all writers. Like if we don't know something, we research it, and that's kind of the whole adage of write what you know. And that doesn't mean you can't learn more to be able to write more. Yeah, because since like a lot of negative desires tend to be like the strongest ones, like of course you're gonna have those desires of like passion and like wanting to protect and do good, but the ones that kind of like drive people are very much those it's instinctive kind of immediate like gratification kind of desires. So it's like, I'm hungry, I want this food, I'm just gonna take it, versus knowing that that's wrong to just take something that doesn't belong to you and kind of suppressing that feeling. The idea is like, even if people don't act out their desires, once those desires are strong enough, they can still make a goblin who will act out those desires. And I think that I might introduce like Kiwi running into some other goblins. I might save that in like a separate short story of Kiwi, where Kiwi meets goblins who aren't like born from those negatively selfish desires, more of like goblins like Kiwi where all they want to do is bake or craft, or like even a Kiwi or a goblin that wants to be like a mom, like just that strong desire of anything. Funny enough, I had a magical girl short story too, where there's an organization that uses magic stones that embody human concepts, and people who embody those concepts are chosen to hold those stones to fight this great alien evil. Huh. Is that different than that story you told me about before? Because I know you have some stories that kind of have like similar power concepts, but you're kind of showing them in different ways, or like utilizing them in different ways. There could be kind of like a Goblin Humane Society. It'd be like kind of like goblin activists who try to change the perception of them by doing good in the world. Well, I think that's kind of a thing with like writing all sorts of stories, is like if you get an idea for a bunch of different stories, you can utilize it in different ways, or like you could take parts of it and use it in one story over another. I think that's why like connected universes are so popular nowadays, especially with like the Brandon Sanderson universe, the Stephen King universe, even in like more visual media like anime, manga, and like the MCU and other movies. You get to keep those ideas that you couldn't use for one story and then still use them for something that's connected. I think even if it's not popular fans, that's why creators like having their universes connected. Or you could even use it just for like little Easter eggs here and there. And I think that's how I'm going to utilize it for most stories, is just like little Easter eggs. There will be definitely a few that are like more connected than others, like with my Saints and Sages storyline that I want to do. That's pretty much just two separate stories that are running at the same time in that world, and they do a lot of cross interacting, because like the two main characters, like their whole point is one of them taking down the other one because they see them as evil. The twist for this one was that the magic stones absorb what is needed or longed for the most. Like strongest magical girl is hope, because hope is what is needed most of the time. Okay, yeah, I can see where like you would go with that idea. It's an interesting one. I definitely, I know you, and I know if you get hooked on it, you're gonna like crank out like 200,000 words of world building. But I think you should definitely, like, of course, always focus on where you have the passion, but you do have to make sure to rein yourself in so you can get the story out. That's why, like, right now my idea for writing is I'm specifically writing everything as a short story first, and then I will put those short stories out for people, and people who like my stories or who want to read more will go ahead and like vote for what story they want me to continue. And whether or not I have an idea for like a whole series, I'll do at least one book for each of those short stories that people want. Yeah, it's Saints and Sages. Like, I specifically tried picking that name to kind of go in like the naming conventions of a lot of cultivation fantasies, and as opposed to like other like wuxia style fantasy or other cultivation fantasies. A lot of them have like 1 or 2 word titles as opposed to the full sentence titles of other light novels. And like even Cradle is a big inspiration for me because it's like a Western style cultivation fantasy, and it kind of uses that whole naming convention as well. And I think one of the biggest ones for me was one of the first ones I got into was Tales of Demons and Gods. So that Demons and Gods part kind of really inspired the Saints and Sages, and breaking down the world building for that, like those are just like classifications of high tier immortal martial artists. And it's like saints are more of the mystical kind of martial artist, and sages would be more of the practical physical martial artists, like swords are swordsman and all of that. And I don't know if I want to specifically have them referred to as their titles, but I'll figure that out as I go with that. Yeah, I knew like as soon as you give me an idea, like it's very likely that I could probably make a little pamphlet out of whatever idea you gave me, because it's never just like a concept or a note or something like that. Is the typical 6-month book release cycle the expected one? Like, I remember Light Lark had its sequel releases 6 months later. It's hard to say because some authors are better at it than others. Like Will White, when he was doing the Cradle series, he probably released one every like 6 to 8 months. There was a couple of years where he released 2 books in 1 year. But I think that he knew what he wanted to do with that story, and there was such like a fervor of people reacting to that story that he wanted to like latch on to that, so he kept trying to put out quality books as fast as he could. And then you have Brandon Sanderson, who like he has a dedicated like writing schedule, and with COVID he just had so much time that he wasn't going out and doing stuff, that all he could do to keep from going story crazy was work on like 6-7 projects in secret, and then just kind of like dropping them whenever his publisher was ready to drop them. I think the timing for the release schedule is mostly your publisher's decision. If you do go the traditional route, if you go the indie route, you can be freaking crazy and be like Quan Mills, where as soon as he comes up with an idea, that thing gets drafted, edited, and published. And I need whatever he is cooking with, because he just pops out these stories, and from what I heard, like the concepts are absolutely out there, but the writing is actually like generally good writing. And I think that I was talking with Elaine when I was chilling in her stream, that for creatives, one of the best things that you can do is quantity does lead to quality. The more you do it, and then you study like what worked and didn't work of your own projects, the better it gets over time, because it gets easier to do the good parts and you're not trying to cut out the bad parts. So the more writing you write, the better you get, and the less you have to edit, the faster you can put out your books. Unless you're like George R.R. Martin, where you just have so much anxiety and depression over your own series that you don't want to finish it. That's what I'm convinced he's at. Finding a usable name for a type of magic system user is so hard. I think depending on like your setting, a lot of people do try to kind of just add in like whatever user term usually goes with that. Like a lot of Mancers, a lot of IST kind of just go with magic systems. I don't think it's anything that you have to be terribly complicated about, because for the most part, people are very lazy with naming things. Like in real life, just lazy with naming things, and will use kind of like a root word, or like for us, it would be Latin or Greek or something like that. And that'll be like the official word. And then you have like a more layman kind of colloquial word, like for aviation, like that's just flying planes and helicopters and whatnot, but it's a broad umbrella. And then you have like aviation pilot, aviation assistant, all these other words, but that's just a pilot, a stewardess, or anything like that. Yeah, the like insert term user or holder here, like that tends to be a very easy go-to. I know like with Jujutsu Kaisen, they were just Jujutsu sorcerers, which is like magic sorcerer. And then you have Naruto, where they're ninjas, that's their title, and they wield chakra as part of being a ninja. And then you'll get like kind of the specialization of what kind of chakra they can use, but it's typically just deemed as like water style, earth style, that kind of stuff. Genshin calls them vision holders. Okay, yeah, I'm not super familiar with the Genshin lore, but yeah, I think, don't they have something to do with stars? So that does make sense. Yeah, and like elemental users, I think cultivation tends to be both more creative and more simplistic with it, because they do have like the very simple that they're just translating from like actual Taoism and like historical fantasy, so they're kind of taking the terms from that. For me, for Saints and Sages, I was using that genre as a building off point to create my world, so I am going, like, I'm gonna take some of those mechanics and some of those basics, but I'm gonna try and create my own thing with it. And I think like with Cradle, they did try to do that a little bit, but for the most part, like where it didn't matter to the story as much. He did kind of like get lazy with it and just let the world building take place. Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, I find Genshin interesting from like a cultural and like world building aspect, like just how people interact with it. I think Genshin would be something interesting to kind of research if I did want to go with more of a kind of lit RPG style story. I do have a few ideas that would fit into that realm, but at the same time, I'm not as like traditional lit RPG as other authors. I mostly focus on like fantasy and wanting to create worlds just based off of my ideas, which for the most part, most of my ideas are inspirations from just what I've consumed. So that's kind of like where the idea of Kiwi growing as an author by experience the world comes from. I could put Cradle on my to read list because of Scribd. Please, I beg anyone here to get oh, is that Scribd account? You get $2 a month and a free. Oh, nice. Actually, I know Will White often will do like discounts, or you can get certain books of his series for free, either on Kindle if you're fine with going through Amazon, or even on his website. Like you can order, I think right now his Cradle series is 12 books, plus like a little short story collection for the world. But for the most part, he does a discount where you can get like 3 books at a time for a discounted rate than getting each of them individually. But it was behind Magic and Spirit. Oh, okay, yeah. I definitely see like wanting to be able to get all the different ones you have. I still have like, I think I just got another Audible credit today. So I have like 5 auto credits that I need to use, but I just don't feel like I have enough time to actually do what I want, because since I work during the day, I have to kind of like get interrupted all the time, and it's kind of hard to keep track of a story when you get interrupted and have to talk to a patient or a customer for, I don't know, 10-15 minutes and then get another one like 2 minutes later. Let's see. So I am at the part where Kiwi is encountering the goblins for the first time, kind of like from a distance, getting an idea of what they're about. Let's see here. I stopped reading Animorphs after learning about all the Ghost Raiders past the 6th. I did not know Animorphs had a whole bunch of Ghost Raiders. I know there are a few series like that, or like even Rick Riordan. He purposely did the Rick Riordan Presents so that he could like amplify other writers' voices from the cultures that like those stories were from. I actually got attached to the characters and didn't want to see them be butchered by the ghostwriters like I saw. Some ghostwriters are very good at capturing like the original voice that the author had, but it depends on how much of the story was laid out beforehand and like if they just freely go and do what they want with it. Because I know Brandon Sanderson finished the Wheel of Time series after that author passed away, and some people liked it, some people felt that it wasn't like faithful to the original. I think he did a good job with the show. I'm not super familiar with like the actual books, but he was like an executive producer, and for the time that Amazon actually let him like make decisions, he did good. But then Amazon decided to go in their own direction, and from what I hear, the creative directors weren't really listening to him anymore, and then the show ended up getting canceled. But I know still a lot of people want another streaming service to pick it up. Everything after book 20 is ghostwritten until the last 5. See, I didn't even know there are that many Animorphs books. I think when I was reading them when they came out, there was probably only like 10 or 12 Animorphs books. And I mainly knew Animorphs from the movie that I had a teacher show us in class once. One of the ghostwriters made the animal-loving pacifist character comply with cannibalism. I would have to see like how that character developed, because if it came out of nowhere, that's crappy. But if that like worked with the like character development, like if they went through intense enough stuff, which I know in that series it can get pretty intense, then it would make sense. Yeah, I would love, like, I think audiobooks would probably be towards the end of like the publishing line for me for a book or a series, because for the most part I would plan on short story. If it's popular enough, it would become a book, then I'd publish it as like an ebook after like releasing it as a serial online. Because if I'm going to be writing the story, I want people's eyes to be on it so that they can be interested in it, they can get other people who are interested in it, and then I would have the ebook as a way for people to read it all together, and then or to even get it out to other people. And then I would go from there doing like paperback and hardcover, and those I would kind of treat like the paperback would be just like the physical book so that you can have a copy of it, or it can potentially be physically sold in stores. And the hardcover would be like a special edition in most cases. And then after that, I would like save up and get like a proper audiobook done. Unless I can get picked up by Tor, because Tor like blows up everything that it publishes. This character empathizes with the alien species, those invading them, even one that... Ooh. Yeah. It sounds like that whoever they got to ghostwrite did not know the series, and just like, and they probably got multiple ghostwriters, but like just people who were doing a job and did not know or care about the series. They just had plot points that they needed to hit. Let's see. Where was it in here? I think it was right here. Yeah, okay. So here Kiwi has gotten familiar with the forest, getting comfortable, and that's when the other 3 goblins come in, and Kiwi's just kind of watching from the distance. You get a little characterization with the different goblins. You got like the blue goblin, you got a big goblin, you got a green yellow goblin, and I think I kind of want the blue one to be like a leader, kind of like, think of it as like little gang of hooligans, pretty much is what this group is. Like, their desires aren't strong enough for them to be like an active problem, but in a way they're like gremlins, where if they're left to their own devices, they're going to cause problems. And so the blue one would be like the smart one, the leader. The big one's probably going to be just like a clumsy, like giant compared for a goblin. And the green yellow one's probably going to be like the greediest, like the most, like their desire was probably born from somebody who doesn't have anything and just wants everything. Yeah, I'm glad that like the gremlin idea kind of works with it, because like it's the beginning of the story. Even if it is a short story, I kind of want like these to be like lower stakes that Kiwi can kind of just like observe until they take themselves out. So, and since I am doing just the word on the page, I'm probably not going to like write too much in detail tonight. I think my main point is to get this idea out and have it end somewhere around 2,500 words. And then once I start drafting, I can clean things up, because I want all my short stories to be between like 2,000 to 3,000 words, like 2,000 minimum, 3,000 maximum, but hit that sweet spot of 2,500, because that tends to be like, that's like about a 10-15 minute read, depending on how fast a person reads. And those are really easy to read online through your phone, anything like that. Like, my whole creation model I want to go with is just like focused on the online aspect of it, since that's where most people who do still read are reading their stories. You do get those people who like prefer physical books still, and once I get to that point with a story that has already tested with audiences and has been kind of like beta read by audiences or alpha read by audiences as I put it out, then it will really help me dial in what worked and what didn't work on a chapter to chapter basis, and I'll just put out that much better of a physical product. Okay, let's see here. So we start fighting. I think right now I'm just gonna pretty much write out like beat points. Kiwi hosts the trio as they moved into a ruined village or abandoned village. They go from house to house in sacking for anything shiny or interesting enough. And it is like, yeah, the time's right there. It is after midnight here, so my brain's probably not going to work as fast as, or my fingers might not work as fast as I'm actually talking. Let's see here. Yeah, the physical books aspect is something I see web authors doing less, like Lore Olympus. Yeah, it's, now that like online stories are becoming more popular and you can make money off of your stories before they become published, I think that's really lowered the barrier for like normal authors, and people are starting to understand that they don't necessarily need a publisher in order to publish their story. And there are some people who are still like, if anybody asks you for money in order to publish your story, it's a vanity press, don't do it. But if you are going like the indie publishing route and you're going to publish that and you don't want to do it through Amazon, you're going to have to pay like the printer to make your books. And you may have to print a distributor if you don't want to physically hold like a warehouse of your own books, which most authors don't, because they either don't have the space for it or they don't want to take on the responsibility of shipping it out. But there are a lot of indie authors who will just order their books from a printer and then just do a quality check and ship out the ones that are good enough quality. And a lot of them do like sales for damaged or misprinted books. I think I saw a TikTok earlier of an author who's doing just that. Yeah, so the whole thing of a vanity press is they try to market themselves as like an indie publisher. And in one case, they are an indie publisher. They're not part of like any big publishing house, and they are like working directly with the author to publish their book. But their business model isn't investing in a story in hopes that it will become popular and they can make their money back. Their point is to charge the author for the creation of the book, and that's it. Like maybe they have some connection so the book can get sold in stores, or maybe they do have ways for like marketing, but like a traditional publisher, they're not going to do any of the marketing for you. They may get you into a store, but most likely they won't. And they're not going to like list your book on their own. They're basically going to send it off to their printer, whoever they do it, whether in-house or not, and they'll charge you for the cover design and hire an artist to do it. If they don't have one on staff, they'll charge you for the formatting. Basically every part of making the book they'll charge you for a flat fee, and some of them you can retain your rights just like if you were indie publishing, but a lot of them do try to get the publishing rights or the copyright rights for specific versions of your book. Like if you publish your paperback with them, they have the rights to the hardback or any sort of other things. And some of them do get like rights that you think that you would never need, like audiobook rights or movie/TV show rights, and they'll sell that off to Hollywood. Yeah, very much professional pumping numbers. Like they're kind of like the house flippers of the book world. It's just, they don't really care about editing. As well, web novel, definitely. Like web novel is very predatory with the online serial space. That is if you do any contracts with web novel. If you're just posting your story on web novel and then redirecting traffic to like a main website or somewhere else that you can like get paid for your story, then that's not a bad platform, because there's a lot of readers on web novel, even though they are very predatory to their own audience. Like I don't know how many coins it costs, but I think somebody I saw somebody on Reddit do the math, and it ended up being like anywhere from 50 cents to $1 a chapter that you are unlocking. And on web novel, a lot of those authors do like less than 1,000-word chapters for most of their chapters, so it's definitely not worth it as a reader. to buy or to unlock chapters unless you have the option to unlock them in batches for like a cheaper price. $93 a chapter, or is that just $93 for like a book? Because like, yeah, it's nice that the author's getting paid that much for their writing, but at the same time, a lot of those writers end up lazier if they're specifically publishing on web novel or focusing on web novel, and most of that money does not go back to the author. It goes just to web novel, and they don't really do much with that money except keep it for themselves. Royal Road's a little bit better, at least like all of their chapters are free, and if you want more chapters you go directly support that author, but at the same time their publishing side's not that great yet, and there are certain things about Royal Road I just don't really like, especially like with how much AI is used for cover art in both Royal Road and web novel. I wish that they had like a stronger community of like artists that like were offering commissions, or were even just like fans of a series and donated a cover art. I think at this point, at least for Royal Road, because I haven't been on web novel in a while, the worst part is the AI ads. Like, they don't generate the ads, they'll generate the images and then Photoshop them to look like whatever they want the ad to look like. But the meta of like the meme ads with AI is honestly annoying for the most part. Like, very rarely do I find a story through an ad that actually looks interesting enough to click on it because of that. Yeah, I don't think, like, unless I get offered some like really good deal, I don't think I'm gonna do any sort of publishing like contract or partnership or anything like that. I'm pretty much gonna do everything myself, and once I get to the point where I can go from publishing an ebook to turning that ebook into a paperback, I'll do more research on specific printers, because I do know that like there's a few printers. I'm gotta find the name for the printer who did the sequel for Fourth Wing, because that was just an absolute shit show. Printing books backwards, upside down, printing the first book in the cover of the second book. Oh god, like that printer had to go bankrupt just from that publicity like nightmare. Yeah, a lot of the authors, especially the ones who are like putting out multiple chapters a week, whether they're doing just like 2 chapters a week or like a chapter a day or even multiple chapters a day, most of them are either unemployed for one reason or another, such as like they're working on disability, or they're a student, or anything like that, where they're just not getting a lot of income in order to commission an artist. Like, I can kind of understand it, but at the same time, you don't need like a full art cover for a thumbnail. You can get away with, like, Royal Road has like a basic cover designer you can do with just text and backgrounds, or you can go into Canva or any sort of like photo editing thing and design a cover there. Like, I played around with like some Canva cover art, and it wasn't great, but I got some feedback from like graphic designer friends I have and other artist friends that I have, and I kind of know like what to do to improve it. But still, like, even the shitty version is good enough for like web forum thumbnail for a book. And like, even the minor detail stuff, you're not going to notice that just looking at a thumbnail on your phone. And then you do have those authors who are like working full-time, minimum wage. They're trying to just like squeeze in what they can. But I think if you can't afford like a proper cover artist, either go with the very basics of just putting the title in the thumbnail, or do your own thing. And if it sucks, it sucks. You can always make it better later. Yeah, public domain art is a really good idea as well. There's a lot of like copyright free like art that you can do, even if you're just like grabbing like free clip art or free like photos. I do know that like for most of those services you do have to like pay to get rid of the watermark, but it's usually not too bad, especially if you are using it a lot. Or it's pretty easy to find a version without the watermark online these days. It's just a problem if you are just Googling images, you don't know what the copyright is for those images, and you don't know if like those images were based off of AI and listed in like a copyright free thing. AI's messed up a lot of stuff of it, but there are options. At the end of the day, it's a written product or a written art, and if you just have words for your cover, that's perfectly fine. Some places like Fiction Press, which is like the original fiction kind of like OC version of AO3, like it's literally the sister site of AO3, but they don't even have spots for thumbnails. Like the thumbnail that pops up is your author profile, and then it's just whatever title you put. Trust me, I work full-time and I still feel like I identify as barely employed, because it feels like my paycheck is gone before I know it. Granted, my wife gets most of my paycheck so she can pay the bills, because I suck at doing that. The Reddit post said flashy AI covers will attract more full-time worships the cube. It's just text in the background with a hammer motif out. Yeah, like it really does depend on like, you want to do something that will catch your eye to start getting you readers, but what keeps the readers is the quality of the story and the quality of your writing. And honestly, how engaging and the quality of your story is more important than the actual writing aspect when it comes to sites like Royal Road and other like serial fiction websites. Especially in like the fantasy and sci-fi space, because it's kind of accepted that most of these authors are just starting out, and with other ones it's more acceptable that like with romance, you're not really going to get plot. The whole point is vibes with romance, and if it is like the more spicy romance, the whole point is if you can write the awkward scenes, you could write like those spicy scenes really good, they don't care how bad the plot and dialogue are. So really, like, technique takes a backseat to the quality of the feeling the reader gets reading it. Like, there's a few stories, like, I think I am more on the rare side for as a reader on those websites, because I do really get bothered by like bad grammar and bad typos. Like, I can understand like the occasional typo, but if like every other paragraph has like several typos in it, or the grammar just feels like a caveman wrote it, I can't get by with it. Like, even bad translations, I can handle a certain quality of bad translation, but if it's like they're changing up the same phrases that get said between people, or just in like different speech bubbles or paragraphs, I will stop it, just because there is no consistency with the translation. I think that's kind of like my limit for translation errors, is if there's no consistency. but as long as it's consistent, even if it's bad, I don't know enough of the language to know whether it's bad translation or just bad writing. And so then I just kind of decide whether or not I'm going to drop it based off of if I like the story or not. I really need to get some bots if I'm going to be doing this regularly. I'm pretty sure that was just a bot advertising, especially since I'm a smaller streamer. Yeah, the Lord of the Mysteries one, I've been hearing a lot of stuff about it. I haven't seen it yet. What I'm mostly thinking of when I think of that is like back when I did read web novels. It was before like AI was a thing, at least as much of a thing as it is now. And so most of it was either machine translated through Google Translate, or it was like actual speakers who translated it. Which machine translations, like those do have like their pros and cons, because at one point, like, it is usually textbook translation, it just doesn't get the context. But a lot of good machine translators do edit the story so that it at least sounds good for the localized language. And then most of the time for translators who speak both languages, one language is definitely going to be stronger and the other one's weaker, and that depends, or that's going to affect the quality of the translation. But usually, like, those are bearable. They're not like absolutely awful. You can kind of like, it's kind of like reading a text message from a friend. Someone say, don't make your story sound too local because it would be hard to translate. I don't agree with that at all. Like, ReZero references Oni and demons from Japanese. I think for what that's getting at is less of like localized to culture and folklore, and more localized to like specific slang or just like everyday little things that are specific to a culture. Like, for most slice of life stories in anime, there are a lot of things that are part of like stereotypes to be part of Japanese daily life, whether it's student slice of life or adult slice of life. Like the working for a black company in anime refers to working for like a shady company, and for somebody who doesn't know anime, like, that could seem like problematic. But you also have going out for drinks with your coworkers after work. That's not really a thing anymore in modern American culture, but it was a big thing in American culture like pre-internet, like in the 90s and the 80s. It was very common that like you're just going to go to the pub with a bunch of your buddies who are coworkers after work, or like hanging out at the bar with your friends, which I think in most sitcoms it is mostly like friends and family as opposed to coworkers. And you do get a few stories where it's like more coworker friendships, like The Office. Like, a lot of stuff that happens in The Office doesn't really happen too much in modern American culture. Maybe in some office spaces, but even then it was exaggerated. And in Japanese culture, it's like every person who works an office job, at the end of the day or at the end of their work week, they all go and have a drinking party, and some people end up missing the last train home because of it. I mean, Onis in general are kind of like wide enough known. like, I don't think localization for monsters is too much of an issue, just because there are so many cultural references to other cultures, like mythology and just their history and whatnot. And like, a lot of people do like learning about monsters, so even if it is like a unique cultural thing, if you put it in your story, it's going to attract attention for people who aren't experienced with it as something new, even if you like one for one recreate what the historical creature is. It is definitely kind of like one of those case-by-case things. Like, for most writing advice, nothing is black and white. It's either going to be something that works for you or doesn't, or even just like, if it doesn't work for you right now, it may work for you in the future, or it may have worked for you in the past. Because these days, when I come across writing advice, it all feels very basic, because I have looked into so much writing advice that a lot of those points just get repeated. And for some people, they may have never come across that writing advice before. But like, the example I would think of for don't localize your story too much is making specific references. Like, I think Sky brought it up for Heady's book. At one point he referenced like social media, or he referenced a specific song, and those kind of things are things that you don't want to reference in story, because like, either it will easily date your story and you can pick a lot of like inconsistencies out, or it can create problems of like not knowing what that certain reference was referring to. Like, it does depend on who your target audience is. If your target audience is Western readers, you're not gonna throw in like a whole bunch of references to I think it's WeChat is the Chinese messaging service, or it's something like that. But there's like certain social medias that are like region exclusive, or even like country exclusive, and you're not going to reference that in a story that's targeted at people who don't live there. Or if you are looking for broad appeal, you're not going to want to reference something like Twitter now that it's called X, or you're not going to, and sometimes it is kind of like copyright stuff too, with like sitcoms doing like make up versions of Apple with like, say, iCarly and their Paraphones, which I think they had in Victorious too, and other sorts of brands. You're just going to do like a parody version of it. Like, even in anime, whenever they have McDonald's, it's always a parody of McDonald's. And that one is less localization and more copyright, because some of those, like the big ones like that, are going to be recognizable worldwide. But smaller stuff, it's just not going to make sense to other readers. Let's see here. Like, all the mythology symbolism and how Greek beings are used in ReZero, like type. Yeah, like, especially with those older mythologies, like Greek and Chinese and even Japanese to a certain extent, like, they are probably the most grabbed from. I know Japanese creators specifically will pull from like the big Western ones, which tend to be like Greek, Roman, and Norse, and then they will always just grab anything that they want from any sort of other Asian mythology, just because Japan has so much influence in their own mythology from those other mythologies. Like, China's going to be a big influence, Korea's going to be a big influence, a lot of Hinduism is a big influence, just because Japan does have its own like version of Buddhism as well. And I think there are like Hindu areas in Japan. Like Japan is broadly like atheist, but they have a different relationship with their mythology than other atheists do with their own culture's mythology, or if they're like American, where they just replace mythology with science. And the thing is that pulling from a mythology is really easy, because there are so many different versions of most mythologies that you don't have to be 100% correct, because one, so many other properties have done their own thing with it, and two, you are doing your own kind of version that people are willing to accept, that like, oh, okay, this version of say Shiva in this show or this story, instead of like the actual version of Shiva. Like even Records of Ragnarok, like that is pulling from like pretty much every major mythology and then some. So that on Royal Road actually made a reference to a YouTuber accent in a commentary. Yeah, exactly. So like, you're not going to reference Markiplier in a story, because chances are anybody who's reading your story may not like watch YouTube. If they do, maybe they were too young for Markiplier, or like they stopped watching YouTube before Markiplier became big. So like that would be an example of too much localization, even though it's not local to your area, it's more local to your culture as an American, or even just as somebody on the internet. I've actually had combos where I educated someone from a culture on their own fairy tales. It's strange, but as an author, you're researching more. I would say that can be the case. It depends on how involved in their own culture that person is, but for the most part, a lot of people, especially like younger people, don't know as much about their own culture as they should. And I think that a lot of younger people are starting to get involved in the preservation and relearning of their own cultures, which is very good, and I am all here for it. You also do have to be careful with like how you educate somebody on something you research, because even research done by people from that culture can be biased. Like, you don't know if, like, say that there was a Native American who was researching all of the oral traditions and stories of like different tribes from across the continent. They may have their own biases because they know somebody from that one tribe that they just don't like, so they may paint that tribe in a more negative light, even just subconsciously. Or they could have their own experiences with their own tribe that they just don't like, and so they kind of downplay the exposure their tribe has in their research versus what another tribe has. Or even like somebody who is completely learning from the different tribes, as like they were completely disconnected from it and they don't know what tribe they belong to, but they're just researching the local tribe because that's where they live and that's where they were born and grow up. Yes, I've never had interactions like that with older people from those cultures, and I love, yeah, and like, I think that is definitely a great chance for like learn from your elders, because those elders who are like living those traditions are a great resource. And even if like what they teach you is different than what is like recorded, that's like the color of their experiences with that culture. And it like really gives you a perspective of like more world building of, you could have two people from the same family who were raised in the same culture, but they experience and they understand that culture differently, just because of gender, age, or even like social roles of, say, like an older brother and a younger brother. There's usually, in most cultures, the older brother is like kind of led to take on the role, the family responsibility, the provider, the leader, that father role. But the younger brother is usually treated as like a backup, or as like a way to support the older brother. And it is like different between families and different cultures, but like that's generally how it goes in most cultures. Yep, we have to be aware of biases in translations and stories. One sect of Catholics try to make Aphrodite marry. Yeah, it's kind of interesting with like colonization too, because you know there's always an agenda with like other people telling those stories, especially with like really all we know about Celtic myth was passed on from like a Christian monk who retold the Celtic stories in the guise of Christianity. So there's kind of like, if I remember correctly, the story starts off with like the purely Christian version, and then the second half of the story is a retelling of it that's slightly different, more in line with like the Celtic oral tradition. But the only written accounts of what we have come from that monk. You'll also find blatant racism in some other literature, like a lot of the fairy tale truths. Yeah, and I think older stuff, it's not so much racism as it is like kind of a thing of the other. Whereas like racism, it in its like modern interpretation didn't come about until like the advancement of like industrialization with colonialism. Like colonialism's where a lot of that base stuff came from, but even like in early like big colonialism that we think of, because like there's always been colonialism throughout history from all over the world, but the original stuff that we think about in a historical context is kind of like proto racism, and then you have like the modern interpretation of racism, and you go back and you look at that older stuff with that frame of reference, and you see it as like that racism, even if it's like from Italians to French or British to Celtic, that kind of thing. And in reality, it is more propaganda and recontextualizing history or rewriting history in order to conquer a people, socially and culturally as well as physically. And it's less to do with hate and more to do with controlling perception. And so a lot of times, like even in the Odyssey, like you can really see the Cyclopses as an allegory for another group of Mediterranean people, because like the Odyssey takes place before the invention of Greek. Like Odysseus the Greek is not the same as like the people who are from Athens or the Trojans, even though all those areas are now considered part of Greece. Like the Cyclops, like historically a lot of translators and historians treat the Cyclops as this group similar to the Trojans, where they were very much an agricultural society with farming and ranching and whatnot. And that's primarily what the Trojans were too, is that they were like a horse people who like settled down and did agriculture, as opposed to with Odysseus and the rest of the Greeks. They were still very much hunter-gatherers. They didn't like at that time agriculture was seen as kind of like this failure to be able to hunt, and so they were seen as more civilized because they were hunters, versus the actually technologically more advanced agricultural societies were seen as the savages. And so that's where you get that image of the Cyclops and why they're portrayed as like these dumb, aggressive people. It's known one of the biggest translations of Arabian Nights. Yeah, well, that one was specifically done by like a British, I forget what he was specifically, but it was like a British explorer retold that story for a British audience. And so on top of like recontextualizing things, they did like have that layer of exoticism and racism of like kind of like the British superiority as opposed to like a racial superiority. It was more of like a national thing or like a cultural thing, where back then like there were a lot of similar stories where the brown foreigner becomes civilized by becoming more British. Oh, definitely, but I mean literal racism, like yeah, like I said, with that, all that kind of stuff, that is more recent history in translations and literature. Like if you, the problem is like whatever lens that you're critiquing a work in, you're gonna see like certain traits or certain things about the story through that lens. Like if you're going to be critiquing say like if you critiqued Black Panther with Sinners, those two stories have their own stories that they're telling about like colonialism and racism, and they do it in different ways, but it's perfectly reasonable to critique them from that same lens. Whereas if you're critiquing, say, Pride and Prejudice with like the original mythology of Circe, those are gonna be very different things, because the culture around women was different, the cultural expectations were different, as well as the reasons behind the stories are going to be vastly different. Whereas with mythology, Circe is a goddess of magic and she's a witch, and the stories that we mostly get come from a part of Greece that kind of like demonized Circe as opposed to worshipped her. But if you found like stories from like her actual followers, her personification is going to be very different, versus Pride and Prejudice that's written by a female author as opposed to most likely a male storytelling for Circe, and it's all about like cultural restrictions for women and kind of oppression in that way. And whereas like the main character in Circe or in Pride and Prejudice would be seen as kind of like doing the best she can with her limited options, Circe in that same context would be seen as like a girl boss, even though she's literally a god. I always wondered, I thought about it during the goblins are racist convos. Yeah, because like in most cases, like goblins are like, that's even a thing. Like, you can't solely go back to like the original interpretation of things. You have to always take into account like what the modern common perception of that thing is. So in these days, like, goblins weren't always like an allegory for several groups of people, but primarily the Jewish. But these days, goblins are recognized as that allegory. And so a lot of companies and a lot of storytellers and world builders have redone goblins, recontextualized them by either focusing on redoing their design or just completely changing like their personality, or even like for a lot of Japanese media that most of their fantasy is based off of like early D&D, back when kobolds still used to be the dogs and gnolls were the lizard people. Like, or yeah, I think I had that correct, because I think nowadays kobolds are the lizards. But goblins in that sense they removed the humanity aspect of it. So that's kind of how they did that, but I don't think that was an intentional thing for them, because Japan, like, media is very slow to adjust for like controversial issues, like with how they draw black people or any sort of person with thick lips, how they portray black people, especially like Black American type characters, or even with like Irish people, and like Hispanics, like most of Latin America, they kind of like treat as a monolith, which a lot of Americans do too. But there are a few authors who either have a connection with that culture or who have a passion for that culture that understand the differences and will emphasize those, like how Chad was portrayed in Bleach being half Japanese, half Mexican. And it's kind of an interesting thing with how different cultures deal with things that are different issues for them, because in Japan, since they are such a monoculture, like those things are just treated as part of media as opposed to actual like social issues that they're seen as in the West. Let me scroll up a bit. I think I missed some. You're completely right. The actual reason we see now is far closer to the... Yes, very much right now. Kind of like that one of climate. Before that, it definitely comes off as other origin, like nationally. Yes. Pre-colonization African tribes had their own ethnicities and social structures, and that's the thing, is like, it's very hard unless a creator is coming from one of those different African cultures for most media to differentiate any sort of African countries. Like, usually the best you get is Madagascar, Egypt, and like South Africa. Those tend to be the only ones that are really seen as different in most media. Even if it's coming from like a black creator from another country, if they're not from one of those African countries, or they're not like a child of somebody directly from those countries, they very rarely do those countries justice, unless it's like a story set in that country, in which case they tend to take on people who would advise the writers, if not be part of the writing team. Like, I forget the name of it, but there was that one movie not too long ago about the tribe of warrior women, and I think one of the main actresses from the Black Panther series was in that. And I really do think, I think it's the Aruba tribe, if I remember correctly, but I think the big drive for that movie coming out was Wakanda and Black Panther, because the women warriors in Wakanda were heavily based off of that tribe, and that's the thing, is kind of like Wakanda itself was a hodgepodge of different African cultures, even representing like different tribes within its own community, but it was all fictionalized and strapped together. Because using that logic, clean would still mean prostitute. Yeah, and like that's kind of the thing too, is like you learn like older slang and phrases too, like moonbeam was another thing from that would make prostitute in like Shakespearean period English. And then you have references to the moon in Japanese culture of like, doesn't the moon look beautiful, is a way to tell somebody that you love them. And even like, I don't know how true it is, but my stepdad growing up would always say that fuck was an acronym for fornication under consent of the king, which I don't think is true. Even if it is, as like, I think it's a historically misinterpreted fact, if it is one. Yeah, and like even my goblin doesn't really have a nose. I do kind of have like that more chibi vibe going on, and realistically I kind of look like Krillin with hair, but like, I don't know, my version of a goblin, like I always like just the cute mischievous little guy for goblins, and there are a bunch of other like humanoid creatures that are just like that cute mischievous little guy, but I like the kind of like inherent failure at life aspect that comes with goblins, where goblins are always some of the weakest creatures, whether they're more monster or they're more humanoid, and they're just always getting up into like little problems or don't understand the world around them. I forget where I got the reference from. I might have been Brandon Sanderson during one of his lectures, but it's like with understanding like cultural differences, where a goblin like may not live in a society that has possessions, so where everybody sees goblins as thieves and just stealing things, like in a goblin society, anything that is in the public is for use for the public, kind of like public bikes, or like some places will have like those book libraries where it's like, if it's in there, it's public use book, but if it's in your house, it's private property. And I really like the idea of goblins being like that, where if it's not on your person, it is public use. So if we're going with like D&D style kobolds and gnolls, the modern like 5e D&D and anything that bases their lore off of that, kobolds are going to be the little lizard guys and gnolls are the little dog guys. They're significantly different than like lizardmen and werewolves or lycanthropes, where they're just like their own little kind of like subspecies. Like gnolls are kind of descendants of dragons in most cases, and they're different than like lizardmen or newtmen, who are also, or even like dragonkin, who are also descendants of dragons. It's kind of like with apes, how we have chimps and gorillas and all that, and people. And then the same with like the gnolls, that like they're just like little dog guys who live underground. But in the original, like I think it's either 1e or 2e for D&D, it was reversed, where the gnolls were the lizard people and the kobolds were the dog people. And that's about when D&D got exposed to the Japanese public, and that's why a lot of early manga wrote their fantasies like that. And then newer manga and anime that does the fantasy genre just bases it off of their own media. It's kind of like with how Christianity is so prevalent in anime, just like with that iconography and like fantasy religions and all that, is because in most cases all of that anime and manga media is referencing Ultraman, because the creator of Ultraman was a Japanese Christian, and he was very Christian. And so like Ultraman is just full of like all of this Christian iconography, and most media that comes after that in Japan references Ultraman as opposed to Christianity. Puck is a fun name. I've seen like a few other people do like variations of Puck, or like their homage to the Shakespeare Puck. I'm pretty sure it relates to that, but isn't entirely. This is where a Redditor would misuse communist. Yes. Man, I'm not even gonna get started on like political definitions and everything, because it is such a headache, especially like since people even on the same side do not agree with terminology and they get so nitpicky. Got Gotchamon, what I'm calling it. I have Koboldmon. Yeah. So if that's for like your story, Koboldmon would be more of a lizard. Like he'd be more like Arugamon from Digimon, and it'd be some sort of Gnomon that would be like the dog one if you wanted to go with like actual D&D, but it depends on what you're pulling more of your references from. Like if you're pulling more of your references from D&D, then you would reverse it. But if you're pulling more of your references from like Digimon and like Pokemon and all those other like Japanese monster properties, then it's perfectly fine to have it as the way you are, because it is right from what you're referencing. Yeah, with Dogmon, like, it's entirely up to you, because you could have them just be like different variations, because like even Digimon had like multiple like creatures that were very similar. Like there were multiple lizard creatures, and there were multiple like other sorts of creatures, and they all kind of like start the same, and they always end up like either human or like this walking gun, or both. But like Pokemon, their names are more unique to their species, and then the Mon part is just the like animal kingdom as a whole. Yeah, you could keep it. Like if you're pulling from that Digimon Pokemon kind of like influence, then I'd say go ahead and keep it. And like Koboldmon could just be like a more humanoid version of a dog than Dogmon. Like Dogmon would probably stay on all fours or like transform into a wolf, whereas like Koboldmon would be more like werewolf type. Okay, yeah, because that is a little bit different than both Pokemon and Digimon, because like at least with Digimon they just get like modifiers to their names pretty much, like Metal Garurumon and like all these different forms. Like their names do change a little bit depending on like their stage. Like I forget like what that early stage is, where they're just pretty much like a little ball of squish, and then you have like their preteen phase, and then you have their like full grown phase, and from there it's just a bunch of modifiers. And then Pokemon, it's like they do have individual names for the different stages. Okay, so what I'm getting at is like I'm seeing like anthropomorphized animals, kind of like Zootopia, but with like monsters. And then the female species trope is that like if they're a guy, they got like a bulge or like an external penis, and if they're a girl, they just got the cleavage. What time is 1:17? Okay. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm going to turn on timer for about the next 15 minutes, and I'm gonna try and do like a solid work session, like focus session, and then we'll go ahead and end up the stream after a little bit more chatting, because I do have work in the morning and I have to be up at 6. Oh, okay, I get what you're going at then. Yeah, let me go ahead, set my timer. And I hope the music wasn't too loud. I'm just pretty much playing it from Spirit City here. With I got my little Kiwi chilling in the background next to my little... that's kind of wee-wee. How I would want wee-wee to look for the most part. That one does have kind of more of a... whatchamacallit... Brazilian kind of carnival vibes to it than I would give for Kiwi. Oh, but you know what? I could actually... Oh, what happened to my timer? I could actually go ahead and set up... and like put Kiwi on screen. I might do that during the next stream. Or not Kiwi, Wee-Wee. Since I do have a model for Wee-Wee now. Oh, you know what? That probably was 15 seconds. Let me... That would make a lot of sense. I could probably click it. Yeah, I can. Okay. There we go. There we go. Actual 15 minutes of focus time now. Yeah, the big question is, where was I at? The bluish goblin threw an acorn, the big one's panhead. On the left, the noise that rang out. Green yellow one dove at the food and yelled at blue before tucking it into the pouch. Made from some kind of shorts that clearly smelled even from distance. Kiwi follows the trio as they moved into a round abandoned village. They go from house to house, ransacking for anything shining or interesting enough. They're tripping over and collecting. Tripping over their bounty. And, let's say booty. Tripping over their booty and recollecting everything they drop. The green yellow goblin finds something special. like a magic tool or unique item that normally at village. Okay, so yeah. Kiwi follows the trio as they move into a ruined abandoned village. They go from house to house, ransaking for anything shiny or interesting, tripping over their booty and recollecting everything. Let me note down that they drop, because I'm gonna forget that. And then green yellow goblin finds something like a magic tool or unique item that normally isn't found in a village. Blue and let's call him Tiny. Go with that little trope. It's not gonna matter because I'm probably not gonna actually name him. Blue and Tiny drop all of their items and point and scream at GY. You know what? Let's just call him Guy. Blue and Tiny drop all their items and point and scream at Guy because he is trying to hide what he found. Blue dives at Guy and tries to wrestle it away. Guy bites Blue and item pulls over to rolls over to, let me see here. There we go. Rolls over to Tiny, who picks it up. Blue's neck is bleeding out. And he pulls out a dull, rusty knife and stabs Guy in the leg while he is crawling towards Tiny. Blue passes out. Blood loss. And Guy is beating on sand. Tiny gets annoyed and picks her now and drops a rock on Guy. And Tiny goes to pick up the item. He is corrected and Blue stumble over and stabs Tiny in the back. Tiny falls down and Blue falls on top of it. Okay. Kiwi comes over and pokes at each of the goblins to make sure they're dead. Oh, you know what? I should have had this on the entire time. I actually really like this noise and I want to get like a mechanical keyboard because of it. But I could do keyboard sounds in the background. There we go. Now it actually sounds like I'm writing. Maybe picks up the item and looks it over. It's some kind broken. Let's see here. Broken magic tool. Looks pretty, but it's definitely worthless or useless. So taking a paperweight. Anyway, tosses it to the ground and looks over everything else or anything that will help in the wilderness. After collecting everything they can carry and or no, after collecting everything they can store it what is it called? I could just say backpack. Like everything store in the backpack they found. He returns to boots. Still keeping in mind the direction on the head off in the direction. I could focus on word choice later when I'm actually doing my draft. They head off in the direction of where the goblins are coming from. Luckily, they weren't trying to be sneaky. Easy to backtrack. Cut to Huey traversing a cliffside and struggling with their inventory. Small item falling out of the bag. Is rally. Here. Huey's arm is too short to reach the next hold and slip and bounce off the cliff into the ravine. I'm gonna put a note in there. Make sure to transition, not cut. Okay, so that's gonna be my last note for tonight. Kind of know where I want to head with the rest of the notes. So I am all done for tonight. Thank you for tuning in, everybody who stopped by to watch. KitKat, thank you so much for chatting with me. I know I did get distracted from what I actually was trying to work on, but it was fun chatting with you, and it does kind of like get the creative juices flowing, so I knew a little bit better the rough direction I wanted to go with the things. But I will hopefully be streaming again soon. For anybody who's interested, I'm gonna find somebody to raid into. Just maybe kind of share the level a little bit. I don't know. Let me see if anybody is raiding right now, actually. Let's see. Because I know that most raiders tend to be during the daytime. Oh, there's another little VTuber who's raiding. She looks like a cute little witch. Let's see. Oh, I think they are speaking French. Yeah, they are a French VTuber, so I will not be raiding because I do not know French, and I don't know if anybody else does. Well, let me go ahead and just raid into Nilbog because they're doing some art right now. I know they're doing kind of a knockoff Labubu version of themselves, so I hope that you guys enjoy that. It was fun hanging out with everybody, and I actually really want to do this again soon, so thank you. Let me see here. Where do I... There we go. I wasn't quite ready, but had to bring up my stream manager, so let me go ahead and we're gonna raid and Nailbot Live. I'm still getting used to all this, but I will be doing more soon. So I hope that you guys enjoyed Nailbot. Thank you so much. And we will be raiding. I do not have any sort of raid message, but let me know.